Hi, my name is James Bird and welcome to my third video in the JavaScript series on variables. Storing data so we can use it later is one of the most important things when writing code. Variables are a method for doing this. Basically, they're a reference to a portion of memory that has been allocated for the storing of a particular type of data. Creating a variable in JavaScript is most often referred to as declaring a variable. So you declare a variable by using the var keyword, and we can give it a variable name like my name. Notice that when you first declare your variable, it's actually declared as undefined, meaning that there's no value assigned to it. So to assign a value to the variable, we need to use an equals sign. So we can say, for example, equals James. Now, if I want to make this into a string, I need to put quotation marks around this. And now we've got a variable called my name, which has a value assigned of the string James. Now, it must be noted that when you are creating your variable names, that there are certain rules. For instance, variable names can contain any number of letters. They can contain dollar signs, for instance. So we can have a dollar sign in here. We can also have underscores. What you cannot do is begin your variable with a number. What you can do, though, is have a number inside your variable name. Additionally, you also cannot have spaces in your variables. So we had a space here, that's invalid. And we must also make sure that our variable names are unique, meaning that we don't want to have two variables with the same name. What we can do, of course, is utilize upper and lowercase characters to create variables maybe with the same name, but not exactly the same structure. For instance, I could have a variable called James, and then I could have another variable I, but use an uppercase in this particular case. Additionally, there are reserved words for JavaScript variables that you can search for on a search engine just by typing in JavaScript reserved words. These words obviously cannot be used for variable names because JavaScript reserves the right to use these in its own process. So what I thought I'd do now is look at some varying data types that we can use inside of JavaScript. So I'm just going to copy and paste in some various data types here, and we can examine these. So in this particular case, I've got a variable x, and I've used variable x and changed it dynamically through time. One thing to notice is that JavaScript can use dynamic typecasting, meaning that we can use the same variable name and typecast it as a different type of value. But please note that obviously we can only use that instance one particular time. So if we wrote it as, for instance, here we've got x is undefined, and here we've got x is equal to null, it would never be undefined and null at the same time. We would have to use different variables for that. So if we look at this, as I mentioned before, when we first declare a variable, it's undefined. Next, we can define our variable as a null, meaning no value. We can declare our variable as a number. We can also declare our variable as both an integer or as a floating point number, but inside of JavaScript it is always a double precision 64-bit floating point value or double floating point value. We can also declare it as a string by using quotation marks, as I showed you in the first example. We can also display quotation marks inside here, but it must be noted that we can't have the same quotes twice or it would end that particular quotation. We can declare a number as a string if we wanted to do that, and also we can have Boolean values. In this case, we're saying x is true. It could also be set to false. Another example to note here, which has been added into this series, is a console log. So in this particular example, rather than displaying the alert window, we want to display the values of this particular variable, in this case x, to the console log window of the browser that we're using. This is a great way for doing debugging. So if we now view this inside of something like Chrome, we can see how the value of x changes over time and how these values get displayed in the browser. So inside of Chrome, we can come in and we can go to Tools, and we can go down to the JavaScript console. And we can see here that we've got our varying values. So in the first case, it was undefined, then null, then we've got our numbers, we've got our strings here. Now remember that this was declared as a string, and then we've got our variable Boolean value here. So again, this is a useful example showing how we can typecast our variables And in the next example, I will show you how we can actually use this within the process.